Okay, so prior to discussing the findings of the survey, I want to talk for a bit about the statewide survey more generally. The mission of the statewide survey is to provide timely, relevant, and nonpartisan data on political, social, and economic opinions. We also seek to inform and improve state policymaking, raise awareness, and encourage discussion. In providing a voice for all Californians in state policy debates, we have interviewed over 250,000 Californians since 1998. This survey is the 49th survey in the Californians and Their Government series, which is funded with generous support from the James Irvine Foundation. We touched upon both state and national issues in the survey with a focus on personal finance, the state budget, state and local relationship, and the federal budget deficit. We interviewed 2,003 Californians from November 29th to December 5th, and the margin of error on these surveys for all adults are 3.6%. For a smaller sample, which we started asking 2 additional questions on December 2nd through the end of the survey, we interviewed 1,012 Californians, and the margin of error for that group is a little bit higher at 5%. Okay. So the approval ratings of state elected officials have been similar since May, and today Governor Brown enjoys the support of 4 in 10 Californians. 3 in 10 Californians disapprove, and 3 in 10 are unsure of how to rate the governor. It's a really interesting finding that there's still 3 in 10 people that don't know how to rate the governor, and this is different from at least the other governors that we've surveyed about in the past. This deep into his tenure that he still has 3 in 10 saying they're unsure. And throughout the year, we've also found that as the percentage that are unsure goes down, we found that the percentage who disapprove has actually gone up. And so those who are kind of making up their mind are falling on the disapprove side as opposed to the approve side. When it comes to the state legislature, approval of that body continues to lag behind Governor Brown, and today 25% approve while 55% disapprove. Approval of the legislature has been below 40% since September 2008. Today, majorities across parties disapprove, with strong majorities of independents and Republicans disapproving. So just over 6 in 10 Californians today say that jobs and the economy are the most important issues facing the state. Jobs and the economy have been the top issue since March 2008, and more than half have said that they're the main issue since February 2009. Majorities across parties, regions, and demographic groups hold this view. 6 in 10 Californians think that during the next 12 months that California will experience bad economic times. And since September 2007, over half of Californians have held this view. 8 in 10 Californians say that the state is in an economic recession, with 4 in 10 adults saying it is a serious recession. Since we first asked this question in March 2008, more than 70% have said the state is in a recession. While across regions and parties, most say that the state is in a recession, Republicans are the most likely to call the recession serious, with 56% holding this view compared to fewer Democrats and independents. And when it comes to Californians' assessments of their own personal financial situation, just 1 in 3 say that their own personal situation is either excellent or good shape, while 2 in 3 say their situation is only fair or poor. There are large disparities across income and education groups, and whites and Asians are twice as likely as Latinos to say that their financial situation is excellent or good. And about half of Californians say that they or their family are financially about the same as they were a year ago. About 1 in 3 say they're financially worse off than a year ago, and 15% say that they're better off than a year ago. 2 years ago, when we asked this question in December 2009, just over half of Californians reported being worse off, and about a third said their situation was the same as the previous year. So at the height of the recession, we had more people saying that they were worse off than the year before. Across regions and demographic groups, most Californians say their financial situation is about the same, and the belief that they are worse off decreases as income increases. Nearly all Californians say that people in state government waste a lot or some taxpayer money, and 57% say that a lot is wasted. Since 2003, majorities have said that a lot is wasted each time we have asked this question. While majorities across parties think a lot of taxpayer money is wasted, Republicans are much more likely than Democrats and independents to say that a lot is wasted. We also asked about two other standard trust questions, and we found that 2 in 3 Californians think that the state government is run for a few big interests rather than for the benefit of all people, and 74% say that they trust state government to do what is right only some of the time or never. And on each of these questions, likely voters, those we determine most likely to go to the polls in elections, are even more negative than all adults. So we really wanted to focus on the state budget situation, especially with the looming trigger cuts that were coming up, which have since been declared by the governor's office. And when read a brief description of possible cuts to K-12 and higher education, health and human services, and public safety that will take effect in January, a plurality of Californians and likely voters would prefer this state address the budget gap through a mix of spending cuts and tax increases, while 3 in 10 say mostly through spending cuts. As you may expect, there's a wide partisan divide on this issue, with half of Democrats saying a mix, while nearly 6 in 10 Republicans say mostly spending cuts. Half of independents also say that they would prefer to deal with the budget gap through a mix of spending cuts and tax increases. Okay. And when asked about the potential effects of automatic spending cuts in K-12 public education, half of Californians and 6 in 10 likely voters say they are very concerned. Concern is higher among Democrats than independents or Republicans, and concern is higher among women than men. Concern about these cuts increase with educational attainment, and 6 in 10 parents of children 18 or older are very concerned. And this level of concern about these trigger cuts to K-12 education could become especially important if the governor links passing his tax plan to additional cuts, which is being rumored currently here in Sacramento. So speaking of the governor's tax plan, as I mentioned earlier, when it became evident that the governor was going to put something on the ballot and we were about halfway through our fielding period, we decided that it would be a really good idea to at least get a first look at favor or oppose on his proposal. And so we asked 1,012 Californians 2 questions. And this plan, which would raise $7 billion annually through temporary tax increases in the sales tax and a tax on wealthy Californians, is favored by about 2 in 3 adults and 6 in 10 likely voters. Nearly 8 in 10 Democrats are in favor, while just over half of Republicans are opposed. Sample size is too small for us to break out that really important independent group, but we'll be coming back to this in future months. When asked a second question about would they favor or oppose this proposal if the money would go directly to K-12 schools, results are roughly similar with a slight increase among all adults and a slight decrease among likely voters. Findings across parties were roughly similar on that second question as well. So when it comes to state and local realignment, Californians continue to hold a favorable view of the overall idea of state and local realignment, with majorities across regions holding this view. 2 in 3 likely voters also say they favor the general idea of state and local realignment. We also asked respondents how closely they were following the news about the state prisoner shift, and we find that about 45% of Californians and a majority of likely voters say they're following news about this prisoner shift at least somewhat closely. Residents in the other Southern California region are the most likely to be following news about the shifts, while Los Angeles residents are the least likely. So when it comes to confidence in their local government's ability to handle the shift of responsibility associated with state and local realignment, Californians have more confidence overall than they have confidence in the ability to handle the shift of prisoners to the local level. Across regions and parties, confidence drops when asked specifically about the prisoner shift. The largest shifts are seen regarding the prisoner shift among residents of the Central Valley, where confidence drops from 66% overall to 52% in regards to the shift of prisoners. Over 8 in 10 Californians and likely voters say the amount of money being spent on state and local pensions is a problem. Public employees are much less likely to hold this view that it's a big problem, and across parties, 6 in 10 Republicans and half of independents say that pensions are a big problem, while 4 in 10 Democrats hold this view. In October, as you all most likely know, Governor Brown released a 12-point pension reform plan, and one key component to this plan is a change from a defined benefit to a defined contribution system. Excuse me. And about 7 in 10 adults and likely voters, as well as 2 in 3 public employees, favor this reform idea. Strong majorities across parties favor this idea, with Republicans the most likely to do so. Since first asking this question in 2005, strong majorities have supported this reform. We also asked about two other reforms to the pension system which have been suggested by Governor Brown, and both enjoy solid majority support. 7 in 10 Californians and 6 in 10 public employees favor increasing the amount new and current public employees contribute so that they pay an equal share to what employers contribute. This reform has the support of more than 7 in 10 across parties. 6 in 10 Californians and 2 in 3 public employees 6 in 10 Californians and 2 in 3 public employees support the proposal to base a new public employee's pension benefits on the highest average annual compensation rather than basing on compensation from a single year. Majorities across parties favor this idea, which is already enacted for new state employees and many at the local level, but this reform would make it across the board at the state and all localities. So at this point, are there any quick questions or clarifications about the state issues section? Yes?
What's the confidence interval of this study?
Well, the margin of error for all adults is 3.6%.
No, the confidence interval.
Well, the confidence interval would change from question to question, and so we can talk about that after if you have further.
Is that part of the report?
We don't specifically get into the confidence intervals. With surveys, tend to focus on the margin of error. Yeah.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is the margin of error for the tax question different since you started it?
Yes, for the 1,012 Californians asked after December 2nd, the margin of error is 5%. Now we'll turn our focus to national issues. With Republican candidates participating in numerous debates over the last few months as they approach the primary season, who do California likely voters prefer? Currently, Newt Gingrich has the support of 1 in 3 Republican likely voters in California, while 1 in 4 support Mitt Romney, and 9% would choose Ron Paul. 16% are unsure currently of who they would vote for. And looking forward to November, we find currently that Barack Obama would lead a hypothetical Republican candidate 50% to 38%, with 11% unsure. As you might expect, 8 in 10 Democrats would vote for the president, while 8 in 10 Republicans would choose the Republican candidate. We find 55% of independents would vote for the president currently. College graduates and lower-income Californians are more likely than others to support the president. In a separate question, we also asked about satisfaction with the choices of candidates, and we found that Californians are divided on this issue. However, nearly 6 in 10 Democrats are satisfied compared to half of Republicans. 6 in 10 independents are dissatisfied with their current choices. So as the president embarks on his re-election campaign, half of Californians approve of his job performance, and likely voters in California are divided. And as expected, there's a wide partisan divide, with 7 in 10 Democrats approving and over 8 in 10 Republicans disapproving. Once again, we find 55% of independents approve, so that's a very similar number to the 55% that would vote for him in the November election. The president's approval today is slightly higher than his record low in September, which was 51%. So he's inched up just a little bit since September. His brethren in Congress fare much worse than the president, with a record low 20% of adults approving and a record high 75% disapproving. Approval of Congress has dropped 18 points since December 2009, and today likely voters are even more negative, with 9% approving and 88% disapproving. About 8 in 10 or more across parties disapprove, as do about 6 in 10 or more across regions and demographic groups. And with approval of Congress at a record low, it shouldn't be too surprising that nearly all Californians and likely voters think that people in the federal government waste a lot of the money paid in taxes. The belief that a lot of taxpayer money is wasted is held by more than 8 in 10 Republicans and 7 in 10 independents, compared to 6 in 10 Democrats. Among those who disapprove of President Obama, 80% say that a lot of taxpayer money is wasted. Among those who disapprove of Congress, 7 in 10 say a lot is wasted. We also asked the same two trust-related questions that we asked at the state level, and found that 8 in 10 Californians say that they trust government in Washington to do what is right only some of the time or never, and over 7 in 10 adults say that the federal government is run by a few big interests. So trust at the state and the local level is extremely high or low, depending on how you look at it. So we also wanted to gauge perceptions of the Democratic and Republican Party on both jobs in the economy and handling the federal budget and taxes. Just under half of Californians trust Democrats to do a better job, while about 1 in 3 trust Republicans. As you might expect, there's a wide partisan divide, with strong majorities of Democrats and Republicans trusting their own party. On both issues, just under 4 in 10 independents trust Democrats, while 1 in 3 trust Republicans, and 1 in 5 volunteer they trust neither party. So we asked 4 questions about what role various policy ideas should play in an overall deficit reduction strategy. And when it comes to these 4 different approaches, Californians prefer closing tax loopholes for large businesses and increasing taxes on the wealthy, rather than reducing defense or Medicare spending. And majorities across parties, including 57% of Republicans and 8 in 10 Democrats and independents, say that closing business tax holes for large businesses should play a major role. However, on taxing the wealthy, the expected partisan divide is present, with independents siding with Democrats. On reducing defense spending, 6 in 10 Democrats compared to 3 in 10 Republicans and just over 4 in 10 independents say that this should play a major role. When it comes to Medicare spending, which has been really talked about a lot in Washington, 1 in 4 or fewer across parties say that Medicare reduction should play a major role, although Democrats are more likely than others to say that Medicare cuts should play no role at all in an overall deficit reduction strategy. So Californians are more likely to support the Occupy movement than the Tea Party movement, and likely voters are even more supportive than all adults of each movement. About 6 in 10 Democrats support the Occupy movement, while about 6 in 10 Republicans support the Tea Party. Independents are more likely to support the Occupy movement than the Tea Party movement, and interestingly, there's a gender difference in support for the Occupy movement, with men more supportive than women. However, men and women hold similar opinions of the Tea Party movement. And when it comes to the role that Wall Street plays in the American economy, Californians are divided between Wall Street helping or hurting the American economy. Partisan differences once again appear, with nearly 6 in 10 Democrats saying that Wall Street hurts the American economy, compared to half of Republicans saying that it helps. Independents are divided on this issue. Californians across income groups hold somewhat similar views, while men are more likely than women to say that Wall Street helps the American economy. So Californians, including majorities across income groups, think that California is divided into 2 economic groups, the haves and the have-nots. Findings were similar when we last asked this question in September 2002, and today we find that solid majorities of Democrats and independents say California is divided this way, while Republicans are split on this issue. We find the majorities across regions and demographic groups say the state is divided into economic groups. Americans nationwide hold differing views, with half of adults nationwide saying America is divided into haves and have-nots, according to a September Pew Research Center Washington Post poll. And when asked to place themselves, and when asked to choose which group they belong to, the haves or the have-nots, nearly half of Californians say they belong to the have-nots. Lower-income Californians are 3 times more likely than those earning more than $80,000 a year to say they belong to the have-nots. Half of Asians consider themselves part of the haves, while 4 in 10 whites and 3 in 10 Latinos hold this view. Views are reversed at the national level, with 48% of Americans say they belong to the haves, according to the Pew Washington Post survey. When asked about inequality and the role that government should play, just over half of Californians say the government should do more to make sure that all Californians have an equal opportunity to get ahead, while just under 4 in 10 say that all Californians already have an equal opportunity to get ahead. In contrast to today, half of Californians in 1999 and 2002 thought that all people had an equal opportunity to get ahead. Today, 2 in 3 Democrats say that government should do more, while half of Republicans feel equal opportunities already exist. Independents are divided on the government's role in reducing income inequality. Solid majorities of Latinos and Asians say government should do more, while whites are divided on the issue. So in conclusion, some of the key points that we think are somewhat interesting is that half of Californians are very concerned about trigger cuts in K-12 education, and most say that local services have already been affected by recent budget cuts. There is strong support for the governor's tax plan and components of his pension reform currently. Californians remain supportive of realignment, while half are confident in the prisoner shift, and there is more confidence overall in their local governments to handle state and local realignment. Ratings of Congress have hit record low, and this is on the heels of the failure of the super committee, as well as a very partisan nature of discussions ongoing about the payroll tax holiday. Newt Gingrich currently holds an 8-point lead in the GOP primary, while half of likely voters would vote for President Obama if the general election were held today. Most see taxes playing a major role in deficit reduction, while cuts in Medicare and defense, while there is the belief that cuts in Medicare and defense should not play a major role. More Californians see themselves as the have-nots, while more Americans view themselves as part of the haves. So at this point, I would, if there are any kind of clarification questions, we can take a couple now, and then we can move over to the other room where everyone can enjoy some food.